Hail Hail and welcome to Paradise Report number 44 on Hail Hail Media. This week, the Celtic Graves Society gave a guided tour of St Peter's Cemetery, Dalbeth, and told the story of the many Celtic men, from former players to founding fathers, who lie at rest there. I tagged along and attempted to record the day. Unfortunately, there's a few glitches with sound dropouts and occasional buzzing, which I can only apologise for. Nevertheless, I hope you enjoy this.
The oldest part of Dalbeth Cemetery. The Dalbeth land itself has been owned, I think, on and off by the Catholic Church for the last couple of hundred years, and there was a convent here. I think the remains of the convent house is still there, which is now privately owned. But when they started burying people in Dalbeth, this was the first party that they used. When the Grave Society started up, this was basically jungle. Look at the trees just behind you there. It was literally, just completely filled. All these stones themselves, they were all completely covered in foliage. The trees, you see the tree stumps that are cut down here. And if you look at some of the stones, when you see this is a good example, there was literally foliage growing all over them. And what the people in Dalbeth done, which is fantastic over the last 4 or 5 years, they basically restored as much of the old part as the policy years ago to knock down a lot of the stones that were in theory dangerous, but what they've tried to do here is to actually restore some of the history. As far as Celtic are concerned, there are 2 of Celtic's original committee members in here. That's right, Brendan, isn't it? Aye. We want all knowledge of there. Hugh Darroch, who was our first treasurer, and James Nellis, who was one of the early committee members, buried in here. With the rest of the cemetery, we can just about figure out where plots are, where layers are, through historical documents and through the records that are kept. But in here, it's really, really difficult. There are some indications. There's a Commonwealth war grave down there for a able seaman Campbell, I think his name is. And the Commonwealth War Grave marks the location of all of their graves. His location is marked, but as for the rest of them, it really is needle in a haystack. So in terms of us being able to do anything in the future to mark the graves of Hugh Darroch or James Nellis, it would pretty much be a case of, we know that they're in here and here's a commemorative stone, unlike some of the others you'll see which are actually on the site of their graves. But as I say, it's a big wide open space, and it might look a bit deserted now, but from what it was a few years ago, it's fantastic, and huge credit to the people at Dalbeth who've made this possible. Who've been great with us as well. In the last, we couldn't have done what we've done in the last 3 years without the help of the people that work in Dalbeth. So, old Dalbeth, 2 Celtic committee members in here. So, if MD's ever got any questions, just fire away, by the way. So, Jimmy McGrory. James McGrory, possibly the greatest ever Celt. Think about when you do a poll about the greatest ever Celts, people will vote for Larson or Jinky. People don't realise the lifetime's work that Jimmy McGrory put into the club. Signed in 1921, played for Celtic until 1937, scoring a world record 550 goals in 545 games. He's the 8th greatest striker in world history in goal scoring records. Capped by Scotland a magnificent 7 times. Cue laugh. The boy from Garngad, Celtic mad. After his time with Celtic, he became the Celtic manager from 1945 to 1965. Any of the older Celts will know that these weren't great times for Celtic. Between
1925 and 1965, when Jimmy was there, Celtic won 4 league titles. So it shows you, when you hear people moaning just now, puts it into perspective. Jimmy McGrory was one of the greatest ever Celts, without a shadow of a doubt. His goal scoring record, and that was in Celtic's worst ever team. So you could tell just how much of an impact he made. In 1928, when Celtic were demolishing the grandstand, the James Grandstand, and were building the main stand, they tried to sell Jimmy McGrory to Arsenal to pay for it. That's how the story goes. Willie Maley and Jimmy McGrory were going to Lourdes, and they get the train down to London, where they were met by Herbert Chapman, the Arsenal chairman, who took them out for a meal in London. And Jimmy all of a sudden became aware that it looked like a done deal with Arsenal. It was already agreed with Willie Maley to sell him. But Jimmy McGrory would have none of it. None of it at all. He went on to Lourdes, wouldn't sign for Arsenal. And then to his dismay, on the way back again, Herbert Chapman met the train, took them out for a meal again, and Jimmy McGrory just says, McGrory of the Celtic sounds far better than McGrory of the Arsenal. And so it simply didn't happen. True Celtic legend, he died in 1982, aged 78. Now he gave 16 years as a Celtic player, 20 years as a Celtic manager, and then after he retired, when the great Jock Stein took over, he then became the public relations officer for a further 7 years. So when you talk about devoting a lifetime to Celtic and the greatest ever Celt, in my opinion anyway, you look no further than Jimmy McGrory, a lifetime Celt, and for me, the greatest ever Celt. The Celtic Graves Society had a ceremony here to mark his anniversary, just at the start of last season, and the turnout was the greatest we've ever had. The amount of ex-Celtic players, Lisbon Lions, it showed the affection everybody had for Jimmy McGrory. Everybody that worked with Jimmy McGrory through the lean years loved the man. One of the things about Jimmy's spell was that Robert Kelly, it was supposedly Robert who picked the team. Jimmy McGrory was such a lovely man, but he wasn't dominant enough. So the board would pick the team, and nowadays, you know, a Celtic manager in the lean years would get a year, 2 years, 3 years max. Jimmy McGrory was Celtic manager for 20 years. It showed how much he was loved. One other great aspect of the ceremony last year was that Jimmy McGrory's son was here, and he was then treated superbly by Celtic. Tony Hamilton here was one of the persons who instigated all the family back to Celtic Park for the game that day. They were on the pitch at half time. There was a marvellous welcome from the Celtic support, and it kind of not so much healed the rift, but it made sure that the McGrorys knew just how an important part the family name is with Celtic. So that's Jimmy McGrory. From Jimmy McGrory, we've got John Bonner down here in the 50s. Sorry.
Before we move on, Jamie was just saying, there's something mentioned to Jamie.
Yeah.
We had a look, went back and had a look. We think Willie O'Neill's ashes are actually buried in the family lair facing the wall at the back there, which we knew nothing about until today. So Jamie's going to have a look into it, but that would be great if one of the Lions happens to be in here as well, which, as I said, we had no idea of until just now.
Yeah.
So let's put Willie on the tour as well.
Right, just down here now. John Bonner here, Celtic goalkeeper between 1948 and 1958. So you see there, I'm reading that off the stone itself. John's family was the massive Celtic men. They've put that on the gravestone. Sometimes what you'll find is, in this climate, people possibly don't want to put any connection to Celtic on a gravestone, but massive congratulations to the Bonner family, because that's exactly what they've done here. John Bonner was signed in August 1948. He was cover for Willie Miller. Now, Willie Miller was a great Celtic goalkeeper, one of the legends. So Johnny Bonner had a massive challenge in his hands to oust Willie Miller. But what John Bonner is really remembered for is the 1953 Coronation Cup, when he kept Arsenal, Man U and Hibs at bay. And John Bonner was really seen as the star of the 1953 Coronation Cup that brought that trophy. Another one-off trophy, the off-time Celtic win. He brought it back to Celtic Park. 10 years in total at Celtic Park. Again, not through great times, but as sometimes happens in life, through one great trophy is what he's always remembered for. John, again, is a massive Celtic man. What Celtic would often do is they would bring back ex-players to work with the club, just the way they do it just now. And John became back to Celtic in 1963 as a Celtic Development Fund. And that was a lot of the new ground improvements came after John's arrival. By the early 60s, the Celtic board had obviously knew that Celtic Park itself was going into decline. 1957 we saw the half stand going over the Celtic end, and then there was quite a bit of movement in the late 60s, early 70s, where the whole ground was basically transformed. If you looked at Celtic Park in the 80s or the 90s, especially an aerial view, and especially in the 90s when it was a time when they were wanting to move on to a all-seated stadium, you would think Celtic Park looked quite old and dilapidated, but it was only really rebuilt in the late 60s, early 70s, so if done, it would have looked a hell of a lot worse. 1966 the roof went over the Rangers end. In 1968 the new roof went over the jungle. Previous to that, the jungle roof was called the hay shed. It had went up in 1929, and it was rusty with holes in it, and people would get soaked underneath it. Before that, 1929 roof went up. There was a roof went on in a new stand, an all-seated stand was up in 1892 at first, but that was burnt down in a fire in 1904, which Willie Maley described as suspicious. And some, if you looked in the Mitchell at some of the reports at the time, the new Hampden had been built, and Celtic Park was the major rival for Scotland games at Hampden, which would be like 80,000 at least, with massive amounts of money involved. And Celtic at that time were trying to build a stadium that could hold 100,000, because the bigger grounds of Ibrox and approaching that. Then all of a sudden, in 1904, there was a fire at Celtic Park just before the Scotland England game was due. There was a fire, and the jungle stand was burnt to the ground. For the next 4 years, that side of the ground lay just with a terrace, and there was a wrangle with the council that they owned a foot length of Janefield Street, which meant if we built a new stand there, it would be only holding the investment we wanted. So when John Bonner arrived in '63, Development Fund manager, he actually made fantastic inroads into rebuilding the whole ground. So '66, the new Rangers end roofing up, '68 the jungle roofing up, and then 1971 the new main stand went up, that's still there to this day. The main stand previously to that was 1929, and before that it was the Grant stand, which was between 1898 and 1829. Before 1898, when we went into the ground in 1892, that side of the main stand side was left just a terrace, because when Celtic Park was built on a free coupe, as it was called, there was a massive hole in the southeast corner. So if anybody's sitting in the southeast corner of the main stand, it's good to know that used to be a hole there about 100 years previous. I'm sure they're safe and well. So John Bonner, not only for being remembered as the Coronation Cup goalkeeper, again when Celtic were not a great team, but we took on the best teams in Britain and beat them. Celtic were really only invited to the Coronation Cup because we were such a big name, there was such a big crowd, and because the games were played at Hampden. So John Bonner as a player, but also as a Celtic Development Fund manager, played a massive part in Celtic's history. And that's John Bonner.
I'm pleased that John Bonner Jr. is here with us today.
Thank you, everybody.
And that's, you know, we mentioned the Jimmy McGrory, James McGrory Jr. was here, the Darragh family, we're in touch with the Darragh family. It's fantastic to be able to make those connections, because we think of these guys as Celtic men, and it's fantastic to see Celtic goalkeeper on there. But much love husband, dad, granddad and great granddad, that also brings home that first and foremost these are family men, and it's fantastic to have family members involved in the Celtic Graves Society and here, so that we can pay tribute not just to them, great people in their own right.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks for
I
coming.
only found the bulletin from St Michael's during the week there. Only the neighbour handed in this morning. That's the Celtic Graves a better rundown. So about 11:30 mass. If I'd known that a wee bit earlier, I came down and gave the headstone a wee bit of clean coat. sorry about that, but here we are.
This is one of the nicest ones.
It's fantastic.
Do you have any memories of when the stone went in and it was the name and the Celtic
I was
goalkeeper
actually
part
myself
of it?
that said my mother would be all that keen in putting
Yeah.
Celtic goalkeeper on it, and for the very same we're all here today, thank you very much. I said, Mum, Dad will be remembered for years like Jimmy and everybody, the old Celtic players. I said, put it on, and I said, it's predominantly a Catholic cemetery anyway. Most folk who come in are Celtic supporters. I think my mother was scared in case it get damaged, but that's never been the case. Most folk are well behaved. It doesn't matter what team you support. If you get into a graveyard or a cemetery, you respect every headstone. It doesn't matter where you come from, which team or what background you come from. So it's even actually I phoned Bobby Main, still under insurance incidentally, to January. My daddy's dead 10 years in January, and he's going to put in a newer lady for us, blah blah blah, but as yet he's probably been busy. And I'm looking at it today, and it would have been nice if it had been done for you coming down today, but I'll go back on to him again. He'll get it done before January anyway. It's a nice headstone, isn't it?
Beautiful.
That's a lovely headstone of Jimmy's too, isn't it? They're all nice.
It's a great welcome.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. I would known more was coming down. I've had my brothers and sisters down too. I feel so guilty. They were walking down there. And I'm just, oh my God, oh my gang. Aye, thank you very much, boys.
Brilliant. The next one's Thomas White, who's up just near the entrance to the tournament.
Over here, I think hopefully you can all see it, it's certainly a stone that needs to be done up again. This is the resting place of Thomas White, who's basically the head of the White family, the White dynasty, associated with Celtic Football Club. Thomas became a board member very early on in his life. He appears to have taken the shares of John Glass. He was very much the leading figure of the club in the first 2 decades. And he's the longest serving Celtic chairman. For over 3 decades, Thomas White basically ran the club. He was also a lawyer in the city, on top of which he was also a newspaper publisher and proprietor. So a very influential man. Interesting relationships he had with various people, including Willie Maley, through his years as well. And as we know, the White family were involved with Celtic right through until the mid-1990s, before Fergus McCann took. So, interesting individual, and obviously the White Family Association is a huge part of Celtic's history, between the times where the club was effectively owned and controlled between the White family and the Kelly family. I see the Graves unfortunately fallen into some neglect over the years, and that used to be the case of this grave here, which is probably one of the most significant gravestones in Dalbeth Cemetery, although in the face of it no direct Celtic connection, but this is John Wheatley's resting place. Unfortunately it's been done up in John Wheatley has a college named after him in the East End of Glasgow. One of the first Labour, I think the first Scottish individual who was a Labour cabinet minister. It says here Member of Parliament for Shepherdson, but John Wheatley's life story is much more significant than that. Housing Minister in the first ever Labour government, hugely significant individual, responsible largely for the connection between the Labour Party and its significant Catholic support in Scotland, through his work over the years as well. There's certainly some connections, business connections, between John Wheatley and Thomas White and some of the other individuals who are buried here as well. But fortunately it's really nice to see this stone being done up. It's been in disrepair for a long time. It still needs a bit of work done in regard to what was there. I'm not sure if it was a family shield that was up in that part, but it's probably fair to say, out with the Celtic people, John Wheatley is the most high profile individual who's buried at Dalbeth. I know to have been a Celtic supporter throughout his life as well. He once, before they were playing football on the pitches at Celtic Park, it was known as a purely industrial area. He's an interesting individual in terms of the history of Parkhead as well. He's got family connections throughout the East End of Glasgow and a massively significant figure. So Tom White's probably, I think, the only modern day director, and he's buried here. It's interesting. There's not a lot known by us anyway about the White family, where they were based, where they came from. But it's interesting that he still has resting place here as well. Some of you may have noticed we passed a Callahan family grave just over behind us in the second row, and interestingly there's a memorial, looks as though it's perhaps 40 years old or so, to an individual called James Callahan, and it just says in memory from the Tollcross Celtic Supporters Club. I've never noticed it before. I don't know if anybody else has. I think it's just been recently placed. It's certainly very old, so it would appear just a tribute for someone who ran perhaps the bus or the supporters club in the Tollcross area, just one row behind as well. Next we move on to, I think, one of the early players, Ben.
Yeah. I was going to say just another wee couple of things about Thomas White. You know, we talk about the kind of the Kellys, the Whites, and the Grants dynasties. You know, but Thomas White was only 3 Whites. You think as if a dynasty lasts over 100 years, and it was like dozens of them. It was what happened was Thomas White came on the board in 1906. As Paul says, he was a protege of John Glass, one of the original founding fathers. And he was the director of the Glasgow Star and Examiner, a Catholic newspaper in Glasgow at the time. So he then got John Glass's shares. So from 1906 to 1947, I mean, you can slag off, the Kellys, the Whites and the Grants, but down the years, these guys gave their life, literally their life, to Celtic. He only passed his shares on when he died in 1947 to his son Desmond White. Many of us will remember Desmond White. Desmond White was then on the Celtic board from 1947 to 1985. So between 1906 and 1985 years, you're only talking about a father and a son. That's the way Celtic were ran in those times. From then it was Christopher White, who was possibly the least successful of the Whites from 85 to 94 when they were ousted. There was a bit of a tragedy as well with Thomas White, in that it saved a bather from drowning, and he became ill and he died of that disease in 1947. So Celtic lost a great man, the longest serving chairman, someone on the board from at the age of 22. More or less his whole adult life he was on the Celtic board. The next part we go to is the main part where a lot of the founding fathers are. And the first one is Dr. John Conway. See here, John Conway MD. Dr. John Conway. He was only 35 years old when he died. Dr. John Conway was a brilliant doctor who studied in London at the Royal College of Surgeons, and instead of staying in London and cheating the kind of middle classes and the higher classes and make himself a fortune, he preferred to return to the East End of Glasgow, where disease was rife. But he was a charitable man and he wasn't interested in money. And if there's one man who sums up Celtic's early charitable days, is Dr. John Conway. Excuse me. So, when Hibernian won the Scottish Cup in 1887 in the February, they were feted back at St Mary's Hall, where Celtic were founded. It was Dr. John Conway who led the speeches that day, and then it was the Hibernian chairman, Brother Walfrid, John Glass, all these people, all the early men of Celtic's history were all there. And John McFadden, the Hibernian secretary, he responded to Dr. Conway's toast by saying that the Catholics in the west of Scotland should follow Hibs and go and do likewise. Now, it was just over the next few months, so that was in February of 1887. Sometimes there's a debate between, was it Celtic 1888 or Celtic 1887? And of course Celtic played their first game on May 28th, 1888, but in 1887 there was a hell of a lot of work went on, and the work probably started at the end of February in 1887 when the Hibs secretary says go and do likewise. Dr. John Conway, Brother Walfrid, John Glass, John H. McLaughlin, all these people who already knew each other in the different Catholic and political circles in Glasgow at the time, that would have set a seed in their mind. And from February to the November the 6th, Celtic were constituted back in the same hall, St Mary's Hall. There was a lot of debate going on, and St Mary's were the leading figures in the debate, and Dr. John Conway was one of the main men. When Celtic played the very first game on May the 28th, it was Dr John Conway who kicked the first ball. In those days, when Michael Dalbeth placed the turf on Celtic Park 2, the current Celtic Park, in March. It was at St Patrick's Day game when we were playing Clyde at Celtic Park 1. They drove along in carriages and Michael Dalbeth laid the first sod of turf. They then returned to Celtic Park 1. Dr John Conway, he would have been present then. Michael Dalbeth kicked the first ball. That's what they'd done. They had a figure and he would kick the first ball into the pitch. The game would start and they would make their way to the boardroom. Dr John Conway, after Celtic's birth, he was honorary president for the first 3 years. In 1891, in any committees, as MD will know who's ever been on a committee, there's arguments and there's fallouts and people make up, but sometimes they don't. In 1891, there was a move by the committee to make Willie Maley a paid employee as a football manager, but Dr John Conway led not so much a revolt, but the disagreement, the no camp for that, saying that every Celtic employee was an amateur and they shouldn't be paid. Every single penny should go to charity. Around this time, Celtic were taking on more of a business side in Scottish football. Celtic were the leaders in Scottish football. Celtic, you could possibly say Scottish football, possibly no, it would have died, but it would have been years behind. About 10 years later, Rangers emerged. Queen's Park were the big team in the time for Celtic were started. So Celtic were really the catalysts in Scottish football. But you couldn't remain a charity forever if you had to remain as a business as well as a charity. Balance was found, but Dr John Conway, as a for the charity side, was ousted from the Celtic Committee in 1891 at the annual general meeting. He died just a few years later, as you see there, 1894, at the age of 35. But Dr John Conway, a major player in the early days of Celtic. Without Dr John Conway, Celtic may not have been born. Just at the side here you'll see Michael Cairns. It says Michael Cairns. In those days that's a lawyer. He died in 1892. Michael Cairns was another early committee man and a great friend of Dr John Conway. So that's two early Celtic committee men.
We're still investigating the links between the Cairns family and the Conway family and all of these other families who lived so closely together. A lot of them were allied politically, but they were also very, very good friends. Conway, as Brendan says, is fundamental to the and you could say he gave his life to Celtic, but you could say he gave his life to the people of the East End of Glasgow. He decided to be a practicing doctor in the East End of Glasgow, and he died aged 35 years. And you see his brothers, Francis, Joseph, who also died really young. Michael Cairns in the back, who died aged 34. So at the time when we talk about the poverty in the East End of Glasgow and the reason Celtic were founded to try and alleviate that poverty, this really shows that being so young. So first president John Conway.
So we'll just move on straight down here this stretch over the teams here. If anybody ever looks back in the early Celtic history of the 1890s, there'll be certain names that will pop up right away. Barney Battles is one of those names. Ironically, one of the things Barney is most remembered for in 1896, along with Meekin and Divers of Celtic, they went on strike. Now the circumstances were playing Hibs, and that year, ironically, it was between Celtic and Hibs for the league title, but this was in the early months of the season, and Barney Battles, along with the rest of the team in fact, they took exception to newspaper reports of the previous Glasgow Cup game between Celtic and Rangers, where they were seen to be the aggressors and a lot of dirty play, which obviously was unfair. Battles, Meekin and Divers had the agreement of the first team seemingly and they told Willie stripped for the Hibs game unless the reporters, allegedly from the Daily Record, were asked to leave the building. Some things never change. So Willie Maley took it to the Celtic committee, and he was told to go back to them and say, we can't be held to ransom by anybody saying they're wanting to go and strike. They'll have to play. The rest of the Celtic players all got ready. Battles, Divers and Meakin never played. Celtic drew. We had to draft in reserve players from further afield. We managed to end up with 10 players. In those days you had 11 players and no subs. Never the big squad of these days where you could just bring in 3 players. The sad fact of the matter then was that the 3 players were told they'll be leaving Celtic forthwith. And at the end of the season, Barney moved to Dundee and Liverpool for a short time. But Barney, being Barney, he returned to Celtic a few years later. In 1904, tragedy struck in the later months. Barney had caught influenza. Now again, people have influenza, it's never a problem. But back in those days, it could be a major problem. He caught it while playing a game, and then when he went to watch another game, it was worse. At the age of 29-year-old, the 9th of February 1905, Barney Battles died. Barney's cortege for Celtic, where brother Walfred was employed at the school in 1887. Barney Battles, the cortege from there to Dalbeth, 40,000 people lined the street, 40,000 people. 2,000 people inside the cemetery. Now, oftentimes whenever we're watching and we're telling these stories, standing at the graveside, what you've really got to do as well is take yourself back to 1905 and just right around here with the stars. Brother Walfred Mayer returned back up from London for the death of an early player. But all the early Celtic people, Tom White, all the early founding fathers would have been standing exactly here where we're standing today. I'm sure they'd be proud of us standing at the graveside of an early Celtic player over 100 years later.
You imagine 2,000 people in this space as well, literally.
Yeah.
You know, for the funeral, 2,000. That burn was there.
Right.
That's a move. People cramped into this small space to pay honour to that man there.
When Barney died, his wife was pregnant, and the son was called Barney Battles as well, and he became a Hearts in Scotland legend. So the name lives on in the East End of the country as well.
Barney had also had 2 testimonials, one of the very few Celtic players, not just to have one, but he had 2 testimonials. And one of the great thing about the battle story, as we said to John Bonner Jr., we talked about the Brewery family, we're in touch with the Battles family. We're in touch with Barney Battles Mark V. His name is actually Mark Battles, but throughout the decades they've all insisted, and the firstborn son is always known as Barney. And we're in touch with the Battles family, and they gave us permission to restore his headstone, and that's, you know, it's a fantastic thing, and they, you know, are grateful that, you know, we're here and able to tell the story of Barney himself, who not only was a Celtic player but who lived in the East End of Glasgow, and that was maybe one of the reasons why 40,000 people were at his funeral. That, you know, like Tommy, he was born of the East End and he stayed and lived here, and he was a hugely popular figure in our early history.
A strange thing happened when we discovered this grave at first. What we would do when the Celtic Graves Society started up, we'd look up early players and early founding fathers. We'd look up the obituaries in the Observer. We'd get the date of death. You could then phone up the Archdiocese. Barney Battles, 9th of February 1905, and the Archdiocese Clyde Street, they would tell you the plot number and the layer number. So this is 3A, and then you get the layer number as well. So you're basically like 3A, and at the side of the stones you sometimes see a number. So if you're looking for 200 and you find one, you know you've got a good walk on down. So we found Barney Battles here. When we found Barney Battles, this whole shrubbery was a way out. You could hardly even see the headstone. there was a tree branch, big thick branch here, coming out the ground. But almost by a miracle one day we come along, and it was like that there before we got it restored. Some kind person that is unknown, that's definitely not here today. And you know?
No.
And then the way out, when they're walking out with the chainsaw, and one of the boys who works in boys, no bother, just walking out the cemetery with a chainsaw, as you do. So, but thankfully to these mysterious people, without any damage being done, at least we can pay homage to Barney Battles without having to look through a tree.
Imagine some poor soul walking their dog at 9 at night and they hear this chainsaw.
I'm not sure if we ever found out what his dad was called, Brendan, if he was a Barney as well, but there is a story, and I think it may be in one of Pat's books, about the dad trying to park one day and being refused, presumably because he was the worst for wear for drink, you know, and he ends up shouting at the guy, I'm Barney Battles' dad, blah blah blah, and ends up saying to him, I put the bone in him. we don't know if he made it into the game or not, but quite an interesting family.
Because in these days, the 1890s, you had to be rough and ready for the game, you know, and there's quite a few of the early players that we'll see in the exact same mould as Barney Battles, that they'd be ready for a battle. We'll move on. Just to the side here, it's died 26th of August 1909, he's 49. And John McKillop, Justice of the Peace, died 1914. Both of these men had a massive Celtic connection, again in the early days. The McKillops were from Ayrshire, originally from Ireland. And they were in the home government branch of the Irish National League, which, if you looked up the minutes of any of these meetings in the 1880s and 1890s, it was almost a Celtic boardroom. Same people. When they come over from Ireland, first of all, they had a grocer's shop, but the more the business expanded, they then ended up owning a few hotels, and the Grosvenor Hotel, which first of all we thought, we've actually put it in here, was a Grosvenor Hotel at the top of Byres Road in the West End, but it's actually no, that Grosvenor Hotel. It's a hotel that's called the Grosvenor in Gordon Street, just across from Glasgow Central Station. I think Paul was saying one time he discovered the actual sign was still there after a bit of building work.
Central Station now, you'll see it's all been done up. It's a new office block. It's just called the Grosvenor, and it's a massive 4-storey development right there, and it was the McKillop brothers who were responsible for it.
William McKillop became an Irish nationalist politician in Sligo and then in South Armagh. He also bought a trophy for the GAA, and it's a trophy that's still to be won annually each year. So John McKillop, the son, was on the Celtic board. In 1897, all through the 1890s, there was a kind of charity business side debate on the Celtic board, and there was certain people who would be pushing the business side of it. In 1897, the business side finally won the day, and John McKillop was one of the first board members, official board members. All the other ones we're talking about are committee members. Through the 1890s, the Scotland England games were getting hosted at Celtic Park. The Celtic Park was built at first, it would hold roughly about 30,000. The Celtic Park we're at just now, it held about 30,000. There was a pavilion which was at the Celtic end beside the jungle at that corner. There was a Jane Field Street stand that I was talking about earlier on, was knocked down in 1904 when it went to fire. There was a Celtic end, the Rangers end, just massive big terraces. And then there was a terrace on the main stand side as well. That was the ground we had to start with, but how we then transformed from 1892 to 1898 when Scotland played England, 1894 in fact Scotland played England, 94, 96 and 98 at Celtic Park, and there was massive money involved in that. And Celtic, run by clear business heads, would go to the SFA and say, right, what do we need to do? Or you need to put the attendance figures up to 10,000, 20,000. They even get the SFA to build a perimeter fence. In the 1890s there was a perimeter fence with spikes at the top to stop people invading the pitch. because at Scotland-England games there was crowds of 15, 60,000 for in a stadium that was built for 30,000. But this was how you can see, even from the early days, Celtic knew that being a charity alone, they wouldn't survive. They had to be a business as well as a charity. And even when Celtic became the business in 1897, they still gave more charity donations than any club ever did. William McKillop, John McKillop, two names from the early days. The next one we've got along here is John Glass. John Glass is an unsung hero of the early Celtic days. If you asked anyone, any stranger on the street who founded Celtic, they would tell you it was Brother Walfrid, and they'd be right. But it wasn't just Brother Walfrid. And Brother Walfrid's right hand man lies at rest just right here, John Glass. John Glass, a joinery firm. It was from Donegal descent. And the same as any other of the Celtic early founding fathers, he was in the home government branch of the Irish National League. They called it the home government branch because it was almost the government of the Scottish Irish Catholics. So John Glass was the person who it was said could charm the birds from the trees. It was John Glass who would go to Hibernian, and for the very first team, players, but before Celtic's first games at the start of the 1888 season, with 6 Hibs players, and Hibs were really finding themselves usurped by Celtic. But John Glass was the main kind of business mind from the very start. As you can see, the stone has been restored. That was 2 years ago. With Peter Lawwell here with a lovely ceremony, and the stone looked perfect. It was just these 3 dies that was on it, and there was no Celtic cross. But from all the other ones around here with the 3 dies, it's a Celtic cross on top of it. So we were then on the search for a Celtic cross that would be befitting this monument and the stature of this man. A monumental sculpture from Cumbernauld, Danny Rooney, came along and says he'll donate us this cross here worth £1,000 because it's going to one of the early Celtic foundations. So that's how we got this fantastic stone. You see as well, just in a short matter of 2 years, how the weather takes its effect on it. So you could imagine what it's like. These ones here, you know, they're probably about 100 years. But with a fantastic ceremony for this person. But one of the major parts of it as well is telling the story. We're telling the life story of John Glass. So hopefully people will go away knowing as well, John Glass, this is founding father of Celtic. He was, after Brother Walfrid, the main man. He lies at rest just less than a mile from Celtic Park. He was Celtic's first president. And in some of the early, you can get the Catholic Observer from the 1890s, and John Glass, it was one of the AGMs that showed you who all went to how many meetings. And there wasn't just like a Celtic committee. Celtic were structured into a business committee. There was dozens of meetings went on in a year, and there was over 100 meetings, and John Glass went to every single one of them. So you could see he was overseer of everything at Celtic in the early days. Died again, relatively young man, 1906. So that's John Glass. There's some other founding fathers we don't know a great deal about. David Meikle was just there. Sorry, just over there. David Meikle is an early Celtic committee man. Unfortunately, we don't have too great a deal about him. But on our Celtic Graves Society forum, there was a family member got in touch and provided us with pictures of David Meikle. Again, he would have known the other Celtic founding fathers through the same political circles. That's when he became involved. We've got a lovely picture of him there. But apart from, we don't know any other of his story.
The family were based in Butte, and that's the sort of, that's where the strength of the family was. But this is really something has been fantastic at trying to fill the gaps. We can tell some of the story, but it's only really when family members get in touch with us, for somebody like David Mickleham, that we can fill these gaps in. One of the ambitions, Dominic Rafferty, who's David's great grandson, I think, is to meet the families of the other founding fathers, for them to all get together. It was when we had the glass ceremony. Obviously the Glass family were here, and that was fantastic. And Dominic would love to get those founding fathers and the families of those founding fathers back together sometime, and that that would be a wonderful thing if that ever came to happen. But David was one of our first committee members, and again an important part of of these people who founded the club. So hopefully we'll be able to get more information about David in years to come, beyond the family photos of him at Rossi.
Another early Celtic name lies at rest just down at the bottom here, Pat Welsh. Unfortunately, it's an unmarked grave. Anybody that's ever read their early Celtic history will know the name Pat Welsh. It was Pat Welsh in December 1887 who travelled to Cathcart to the house of the Meleys to visit Tom Meley and try to get him to sign for Celtic. He travelled with brother Walford and John Glass. Celtic were formed totally different from any other club in world football, in that any other club in world football would start with the basics, football players and a ball. We never had any of that. We started as an idea, an ambition, a charitable cause. We then formed a committee. We then hired a football pitch in November 1887. We then sat down at a committee meeting and says, we better get some players now. So we looked around for some of the best players, whoever could get a hold of. James Kelly was one of the greatest players in Scotland, down at Renton. Western Barts in those days, Renton, Vale of Leven, these were massive clubs. James Kelly and Neil McCallum both played for Renton. So John Glass was sent down to Renton to try and James Kelly. So you're playing for Renton. They just won the unofficial World Championship of the World when they beat English champions, I think it was West Broughton, Paul, at Hampden. They called themselves the unofficial champions of the world. John Glass comes to the door. Do you want to come and sign for Celtic? Who? Probably the last time anybody's ever said that. So he was told the story. He was obviously hedging his bets, he wasn't sure, but brother Walford eventually says to him, well look, we're playing the first couple of games, even just to get a crowd along, against Rangers on the 28th of May. He says, right, okay, charitable causes, I'll turn up. It's often said since that no Kelly, no Celtic, as it was pronounced in the early days, because once James Kelly played for Celtic, people took notice. In those days, under amateurism, which they called shamateurism, because players were gifted pubs in return for playing for a club, rather than getting actual any other inducements. There was no contracts. One week, a different club the next week. It was only when it came to the Scottish Cup. If you played for Celtic in the Scottish Cup, Celtic played the first round against Shettleston on August the 1st in 1888. If they get James Kelly signed for Celtic, that was him a Celtic player, registered Celtic player. So that's what happened. Celtic then got all the great players, because we got 6 players in total from Hibs. We got Neil McCallum from Renton. Now when Pat Welsh went to the house of Tom Meley, who was known as a football player and an athlete, Tom Meley wasn't in. So Tom Meley was out courting his future life. So he said to Willie Meley at the conclusion of the meeting, brother Walford said to Willie Meley, why don't you come along too? And they were inviting Tom Meley up for talks. So if it wasn't just for that wee kind of ad-lib comment from brother Walford, we might never have had Willie Meley, the first manager connected to Celtic for over 50 years. Now, Pat Welsh was there as well. Unfortunately, Pat lies in an unmarked grave. There's a Celtic chairman, first ever Celtic chairman, John H. McLaughlin. was lying in an unmarked grave until we marked the grave a couple of years ago. So there could have been all sorts of circumstances. But the connection between the Welshes and the Maileys had actually gone back 30 years before that. And went back to the docks in Dublin when Billy Mailey's father, Tom Mailey, was a sergeant in the British Army. Those days, obviously, the British Army, the whole of Ireland, before partition, was under the British Army. The 1867 revolution in Ireland, Pat Welsh was one of the activists in those days. He was then trying to escape Ireland to come to Scotland. He was apprehended by Thomas Mailey, sergeant in the British Army. Thomas Mailey was from County Clare, so he took sympathy on Pat Welsh. Pat Welsh said to him, if you let me go on the boat to Scotland, I'll never come back and I'll never take part in any more revolutionary activities in Ireland. As long as you do that, I'll let you go. You could have got yourself in major trouble for doing that. You've done it. And they kept in touch. When Pat Welsh arrived in Scotland, he ended up in a was it outfitters he had? Taylor, Master Taylor, yeah. In Buchanan Street in Glasgow. So he became a wealthy man, but he kept in touch with the Maileys, and when the Maileys then, Tom Mailey then retired from the British Army, he settled in Cathcart in Scotland, and who was it helped set him up for the house? Welsh. So they kept in touch. So 30 years later, in December 1887, and they're sitting with a sheet of paper, who are we going to get as a flair? Tom Mailey. Pat Welsh would have been sitting there saying, I know the name of the family. Billy McNeill often tells of a Celtic story being like a fairy tale. And when you hear stories like that, true stories, you know where Billy's getting it from. A lot of the story is a fairy tale. Hopefully one day we'll put a marker stone down to Pat Welsh.
You can imagine in any future Celtic film this being one of the crucial scenes. Pat Welsh, John Glass and Brother Walfred chapping at the door in the Maileys in Cathcart. That's got to be one of the scenes. But it's such a wonderful, wonderful story.
Now there's another founding father. Discovered two more founding fathers in Dalbeth Cemetery just this week. And one of them is a lesser name, John Warnock. And what we do is we came across the obituary in the Observer, and it meant he was one of the first Celtic committees, and then whenever he died in 1937, I think it was, the cortege passed Celtic Park and the flags were all lowered to half mast. John Warnock. Now, we phoned up Clyde Street, the Archdiocese, and they said he lies at rest in Dalbeth. 3A, section 3A. Now section 3A is this long strip here, and it's number 250. Now, that was just on Friday we found it out, so we've not found this plot yet. It'll be up this way because this is the way the numbers go. The 250 is down here. So see if we want to just follow along here and help us find them. 250. There, right, that's 258. We'll take 8 steps. Aye, 8 kind of decent sized steps. Baby steps. Look at that. Oh, can't even walk the straight line. Look at that guy. There's no a stone. So see 258. Remember this one here?
258.
This is 248 here.
So that
Aye.
would be
So you need to walk back.
250.
You need to walk 10 back.
Why do you get back?
Aye.
It's like a yard or left.
Oh, wait a minute. 248.
248, 249, 250.
Are you right?
250.
250.
Well found you, man.
This is another one where it's an unmarked grave.
Says it's been stone in the right.
Oh no, the next thing we do is we say to the guys that work in here, can you confirm it? And they'll get all the rest of it. right in front of that one there. You must have to take bigger steps if you were being 8 for that one. So we've got another 3 or 4 just up this area. And there's another 3 or 4 up that area. Okay. Michael Dunbar. Near the bottom there. Bottom one there, 1921. Again, he's an early Celtic player that was he played in the very first game at Celtic Park between Hibs and Cowlairs on May the 8th, 1888. So he was a great friend of Willie Maley's, and it was possibly easier that way to get him to come from Hibs to Celtic. But it was another one of the factors where we used every means possible to get the best players to come along to play for Celtic. Not only did Michael play for Celtic for over a decade, he then became on the Celtic committee. Celtic committee as well as James Kelly. James Kelly was on the Celtic committee for 1891. So you would see we bought players, but within 3 years of James Kelly never having even known who Celtic were at their birth, he's an early committee member who then becomes on the board, and then one of the longest serving board members and chairman. Strange thing about Tom Dunbar, Michael Dunbar's brother, he played for Rangers as well as Rangers at that time, although they were founded in 1872, the first Catholic played for him in 1888, Neil McCallum, and that was only in a challenge match between Rangers and Aston Villa. Rangers sectarianism really kind of became rife in the 1920s under Bill Struth, but before that they never had an actual sectarian policy because Tom Dunbar played for them. But at the same time, weren't in any rush 16 years to sign their card. Tom Dunbar was a shareholder, so an ex-Rangers player was a Celtic shareholder in the early days. That's another one of these kind of clips. Many of the early Celtic players, Michael Dunbar included, were in the beer trade, in the pubs, they'd off sales, and this is how they would make their money, and this was how Celtic would sell them coming to Celtic. The Wee Man's pub in the Gallagate, the original Wee Man's pub, not the one that's there just now, it just moved a few years ago, had been there since the 1890s. Michael Dunbar, he owned it. It was called the Celtic Bar for many years. I don't know if you remember that, Jamie. When did that ever change to the Celtic Bar to the Wee Man's? But even when you look at the Celtic handbooks in the 50s, it's still called the Celtic Bar. So I'm not sure when it changed, maybe in the 60s. 50s part it changed. Aye. So, an early Celtic player, early Celtic committee man, board member. A lot of people remember him for having the Celtic pub in the Gallagate.
And Michael was the only member of that very first ever Celtic team in 1888. Was at rest in Dalbeth, so Dalbeth is a hugely significant place for Celtic, but Mike Dunbar's the only member of that team who's actually at rest in Dalbeth. The rest are spread far and wide.
Next one just over here, you see a new headstone. John Hubert McLaughlin. John Hubert McLaughlin. Celtic Graves Society had a ceremony here just a couple of years ago, and the McLaughlin family were here, and they decided rather than us putting a marker stone, they would put a headstone. So that's even more fitting. They've got their former chairman of Celtic FC. John McLaughlin was another, just like the early founding fathers. They never had any interest in Celtic. They never really knew much about football. What they were interested in was a charity venture. So that John McLaughlin went to school at St Aloysius, and he was actually a prize-winning pupil who could have went far. For some unknown reason, he became a clerk in Bridgeton and then got his involvement in Celtic. We don't know the connection there, but under his connection in Celtic, back again to the 1888 when there was no professionalism, there was not even any Scottish League. Celtic would play a Glasgow Cup, the Charity Cup, the Scottish Cup, and just friendly. There wasn't any, they would sit down again and say there's no any definite incomes here, where we know every second week we've got this amount of money coming in that we can give out to the charities. So John McLaughlin was one of the business minds behind the foundation of the Scottish League, and also the foundation of professionalism in the Scottish game. The English game, professionalism years before. Scottish game only with the founding of Celtic, people like John McLaughlin, the professionalism in the Scottish League. English football was 10 years ahead, and what would happen was a lot of the best players in the Scottish game would just go down and play for teams like Everton, Bolton. John McLaughlin was different from the early Celtic men in that in the late 1890s he was quoted, he became a member of he was the secretary of the Scottish League when it was founded in 1890. He then became on the board, he was the chairman of the SFA in the late 1890s. At a board meeting in the late 1890s, as is sometimes to try and hijack and ask a question that's got nothing to do with Celtic. They've done the exact same, and they asked John McLaughlin, the football chairman of the SFA and the chairman of Celtic Football Club, what was his opinion on the Boer War between the British and South Africa. So John McLaughlin, possibly playing to the field, came out in favour of the British side and saying that the Irish people in Scotland come out with this stuff and that stuff, talking about. This then infuriated the Celtic support. The Celtic break clubs were commenting that it was like the words of someone from the Orange Lodge rather than the chairman of Celtic Football Club, and they wanted him taken off the Celtic board. He survived it, but he was different. He was a fantastic legislator, organiser, prime mover, not just in Celtic, professionalism, Scottish League. Says their former chairman. He was actually the first chairman. He was one of the business minds who pushed the most for the business side to come through at the expense, albeit slightly, possibly more, of the charity side. John McLaughlin. John Glass before him was the chairman of Celtic, but that was a chairman of the Celtic committee. He could possibly then say he was the first official chairman of a Celtic board rather than a Celtic committee, and that was in 1898. When he died, he lived in Hamilton, which was unusual, but he came from the East End, but he moved out to Hamilton, the pubs, and there was a chain hired from Hamilton to Glasgow just to carry the people come to the funeral and the flowers. You then look and it's an unmarked grave. You again ask the question why, who knows, but that wrong's been righted now. So that's the first chairman of Celtic Football Club.
And the interesting thing about the stone itself was the impetus for this stone was an individual Celtic supporter, Steph McCormack, who had read one of our brochures, said John H. McLaughlin was in an unmarked grave, and he took it upon himself he set up a Facebook page and he started raising funds to mark his grave, and his individual campaign was so successful. I think they raised something like 1,200 quid. The stone itself cost about £1,000, so he was able to give the rest to the Celtic Graves Society, for which we were very grateful. But it also shows that what we do isn't necessarily always about the committee of the Celtic Graves Society deciding what we're going to do, but that the actions and the feelings of individual supporters can influence what we do. And Steph contacted us very early and got in touch with the family to talk about what could possibly be done to mark John's grave. So great story, and I think it really is fitting that the first chairman's grave is marked past. John H. McLaughlin's grave is marked as well.
Just to pick up on something that Brendan mentioned about John McLaughlin, one of the schools that John McLaughlin attended was St Aloysius, which of course is still going in the centre of town today. Fortunate thing about St Aloysius is they've got very accurate records, and these can be accessed at the Mitchell Library. John McLaughlin was by far the brightest pupil at St Aloysius the years that he was there, but there was at least 3 other people associated with Celtic or Celtic in its early years who were in his class. So you'll see he was 4 the year that Celtic were formed. He went to school with Joseph Nellis, Dominic McCready Jr. and also Joseph McGrory, who we have a ceremony for in a couple of weeks in Donegal. And so these boys have known each other from probably by that point for about 15 years. They're kind of like a slightly younger generation than Joseph Shaughnessy and John Glass, maybe 10 years behind them. But interestingly, they had a connection that preceded Celtic. And the other slight connection a lot of them had involved with some of the social organisations they were involved in, foresters, or like the church. And John McLaughlin was the organist at St Mary's Church. So that could be another connection as to why he ended up getting involved heavily in Celtic, because as Brendan said, none of the founding fathers of the club that we're aware of had any direct connection with it, football or any football club before they got involved with Celtic. But interestingly enough, a lot of these individuals knew each other before Celtic, went to school together, and then were working in association with Celtic for the next 30, 40 years.
It was an interesting point you were saying there. He played the piano at St. He also played piano for the Rangers Glee Club.
Today we're the Rangers Glee Club.
So we'll move on. We'll get 2 just up here and then a couple down the bottom. We'll move on to the other side.
James Cullen here, who died 22nd August 1901. James Cullen was one of the early Celtic founding fathers again at the very first meetings of Celtic in November 1887. The very first committee, James Cullen in as the very first Celtic vice president. James Cullen also had a cooperage behind the Celtic end. And what he would do is, at big games, people would get the big barrels and line them up and watch the Celtic games from the top of these barrels, particularly the Scotland England games. Now, the other side of the James Cullen story is, from Celtic's very first foundation, there was always almost a struggle for charity and business. And it was all for charity they started, but the business was creeping in. And one of the very first committee meetings, in fact it was in 1888, James Cullen was unhappy again about paid memberships, paid employment for like Willie Mailey and things like that. And there was a fallout. James Cullen led a group who wanted to start another football club at Celtic's expense, and they named it Glasgow. Glasgow Hibernian played on the south side of the Clyde, just at Glasgow Green, and they got a big football pitch, and James Cullen was one of the named contributors. Unfortunately, or fortunately, Glasgow Hibernian started off badly in their first year. They never won enough games to get a real foothold in the Irish community. Celtic never really paid much of an expense for Glasgow. Glasgow Hibernian lasted, I think it was 16 months before they went to the wall at the start of 1889. James Cullen was one of the ones pursued in court for the costs of building the ground, and found he was a paid subscriber, and that was the proof. Just recently there's a family member of the Cullens who stepped forward with some information. I'm not quite sure how much information he's got, because there was still Cullens in the early Celtic committee in the 1890s, after James Cullen had left. They would like to get at the bottom of. I can't imagine James Cullen would have been back on the Celtic committee, but there was other Cullens, probably family members. So that's the first Celtic vice president. Lies at rest there. And just up here is another Celtic player. One of the early Celtic players, Mick McEwen, is buried here. Mick played, and he played in the first game for Hibs against Cowlairs. He was a great friend of the Cullen family. Now you'll notice that Mick McEwen's name is not in the stone. Quite a tragic story, because in his early 30s, times were hard in those days,
and Mick had turned to drink, and unfortunately he was found in Camlacky in a lime kiln. Died of asphyxiation. So it's a tragic story, but it's another, if you picture, Mick McEwen, I think he's in the bottom right. Most of these pictures is named anyway. Mick McEwen, he died and he lies at rest here in Dalbeth. Now we had the plot number, the layer number for Mick McEwen, again from Clyde Street, and the date of death. But when we found it, there's no name. So what we do is we ask the people in the cemetery here, Sid and Bernard, and they paced out the exact location and they put a wee marker stone on it that had the exact number of the layer. That's how we know it definitely is that. Not named there. It was because the Quillins family owned this layer and they buried Mick McEwen. Celtic because he was an ex-player and possibly because of the tragedy of the whole event. Celtic paid for the whole event, the burial, everything else, as a mark of respect. So that's from the early days, very first picture of Celtic. If you look up Mick McEwen, that's where he lies at rest.
And he was a hugely important player. He was hard as nails. A lot of the players in the days were hard as nails. His story is tragic, but when we found the grave, sometimes you know the story and then you find the grave, but it was in finding the McEwen grave to suddenly think, well, why is he in with the Quillins? Then you find out he married into the Quillen family, and you start to dig into, pardon the pun, you start to dig into the Quillen family history more and find out about the links. And I was just looking last night and I was astonished that there's someone started posting on the Celtic Graves Society's website, and he set himself up with the username Quillen, and he said, I'm aware that my family have a link with Celtic in the past, and I've just come onto your site to find out more about it. And the family legend was also that there was a player in the past who used to play for Celtic, but they didn't know who it was. So we've been able to say to the family in the last couple of days, we've been able to say to the modern family that the player and the player who's actually buried with your family is Michael McEwen. So the story's constantly evolving. You know, I don't know if we'll ever get to a point where, you know, we know all the history, but the story's constantly evolving, and it's great when the families, they get in touch with you, because now I'm sure we'll be able to piece together more about the Quillen family, and then also maybe from finding out more about Mick ended up dying of a combination of alcoholism and asphyxiation in a lime kiln.
Just poverty.
Aye,
Because what happened was his career went downwards after he left Celtic, very badly downwards.
Yep.
Couldn't settle at any club. And he ended up wandering Great Britain and Ireland, going to see old players, see if they could help him out, and he used to sleep in a railway station at night time. He used to sleep in railway platforms at night time.
Did he have a pub?
I've heard somebody say he did have a pub somewhere up in Glasgow.
Yeah.
But he just, his whole life just went to pieces.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's what he was reduced to.
Yeah. Through poverty.
It's tragic.
I don't think we've ever found out where he died. I think he died quite close to Celtic Park,
Yeah,
is it? Near
Camlacky.
Camlacky.
Yeah, so near Preston Cross, it was a lime kiln. Yeah.
What exactly is a lime kiln, just for
Well,
understanding?
Kiln that I'm not exactly sure, but he just climbed into it. Night and climbed into it.
Yeah.
And it was supposed to be this, where the chemical substances of the lime kiln killed him.
They use it for building, do they know? Right. Who's in the building trade?
What's
What's a lime kiln? Aye. Brickwork, right.
Drawing out the brick.
Before we move on, and to take us off the trail just a little bit, over here behind there you'll see it's probably one of the biggest memorials that there is in Dalbeth, and there's no obvious Celtic connection to it. When you would it's to Father Michael McGinn, erected by the parishioners of St Alphonsus and friends, and I think he died just a year or two after Celtic were formed. But Father McGinn features quite heavily in some of the Hibernian early history books, because as the man in charge of St Alphonsus Parish, He was a known Hibernian supporter and a regular visitor through in Edinburgh, and possibly, we don't know the full story, but originally Celtic were going to be formed from the three parishes, including St Alphonsus and St Andrew's City Centre, and of course St Mary's. And we know that there was fallouts in meetings, and the parishioners involved from St Alphonsus left. Now, the Hibs book suggests that was because of Father McGinn's influence, and he had wanted nothing to do with Brother Walford's venture, and there was a lot of hostility between some of the individuals involved as well. And he died quite soon after Celtic were formed. As you can see, an absolutely fantastic memorial to him, all collected and paid for by the St Alphonsus parishioners.
That must have cost a few bob in its day. That
You can just imagine, can't you? Memorial now, but I don't think it's quite as big as that. But it's
It's interesting, as Paul says, you know, when Celtic were founded, first of all, the discussions were to feed the dinner tables at the St Vincent's de Paul, St Mary's, St Andrew's and St Alphonsus. But then when St Alphonsus and St Andrew's kind of fell away from the discussions, it was then St Mary's, St Michael's, which is just at the other end of the Gallagate at Springfield Road. Parkhead Cross. So St Alphonsus from the discussions, and it then became two of the three parishes then moved into the discussions. Sacred Heart, where Brother Walford worked at the school, St Michael's and St Mary's, who were always there. So things changed from three parishes to two of the parishes moving out and two other parishes moving in.
probably also explains why nearly all of Celtic's founding fathers came from St Mary's. In fact, I don't think any of them had a connection, an obvious connection. The Macreadys, who we mentioned earlier, Dominic Macready and his sons, at St Andrews, so they were not formally involved with the foundation of Celtic as a result of that parish not being involved, but they became well-known fans. And the Empire Bar, which is in the Salt Market still today, used to be called the Donegal Arms, and that's the Macready family pub, and it was known as a Celtic pub from very early on. So you would get individuals who were friendly with some of the Celtic people who then became well-known supporters as well. But interestingly, the parishes formally refused to get involved after whatever happened.
It's lovely. Hugh Murphy, that lies at west here, and his brother Arthur Murphy, who seemingly lies at west in Edinburgh, but we've no location yet. Now, both of the Murphys were very high up in Irish political discussions at the time. There was the Irish National League, the United Irish League, and all these committees. Again, it was roughly the same people. Arthur and Hugh Murphy were involved in all of these discussions. Now, these guys, Hugh Murphy was the chairman of the United Irish League. This is again only at the age of 47. He'd went to Mass in St Mary's in 1903, and he came out onto the Gallagate to chair a meeting of the United Irish League in Airdrie. He was going to catch a tram. He took unwell, was taken into someone's house, and he died. Simple as that. Now, just by looking at this stone here, you can tell how highly thought of he was in the Irish community. And you see close, we've looked at that stone. This stone's not as big, but look at the harp and the shamrock. This would have cost a fortune in 1903. You look at the wording as well, erected by old comrades and fellow citizens. Revere his memory, I'll never think of him fondly. With tender regret, he was true to home and faith and freedom. That last line is from the words of God Save Ireland. So you can see all these early Celtic men, there was a political, and those were the three main ingredients at the formation of Celtic. Fundamentally, it was all about charity. But how come we hit the road running so quickly? Because a lot of the guys already knew each other in the different political meetings in Glasgow at the time. So that's Hugh Murphy. That's a beautiful stone.
I think we used to finish the committee meetings with God Save Ireland as well, did we
That's
not?
right, aye.
Any chance that that would happen again?
You get focus at your door, mate.
Probably somebody here before.
No me, no me. My previous life, got you.
Everybody's getting searched in the way out.
Meat pie on the day.
There's a guy filming it here. John O'Hara Celtic, first Celtic secretary, lies at rest here. John O'Hara he led the local Catholic Union committees in Glasgow. He was a shoemaker to trade. Again, he would get to know different founding fathers of Celtic, become involved, first secretary. The O'Hara family had got in touch and they wanted to have a ceremony here. They led it themselves. They wanted their own stone. It's a fantastic way they ran it. Got their own stone. You see the Celtic badge on it, which is again unusual, but it's been there now a couple of years, never been a problem. So hopefully, it shows that there is a respect out there. Stones like this can lay undamaged.
All the headstone, isn't it?
John O'Hara, and I'll look for Jamie again to confirm, he had the Norfolk bar in Norfolk Street, the College bar, the top of High Street.
I did, yeah. Soon to shut College bar.
So you see again, where all the different founding fathers, early days, they're all known to each other through political and religious groupings, and a lot of them end up in business shed. Even this guy who becomes involved with them, they always become Celtic pubs.
I lived a couple of doors down from dress, the obvious to identify involved in the trade union movement, in the shoemakers union, and this, as we said with John H. McLaughlin, this is an example of how the graves of important figures in history can be marked differently. We've done this really in conjunction with the family. The family wanted to do things a certain way, and we were happy to help them as much as we could, even down to totally identifying the location of the grave. One of the working with the O'Hara family was great. We spent many a happy hour around here looking for the location of his grave, but one of the nice things I think we done was that John O'Hara, as we say, lived in East and in the same close, well, the Murty family, and the baby, Catherine Murty, died in 1871 in the area where they lived, and was buried in the family lair, and the O'Hara family wanted to make sure that, as well as having the name John O'Hara on there, they also wanted the other family members named on the gravestone, but they also wanted to include the name of the baby Catherine Murty, who was neighbours. So going back, how many years? Who's good at maths? 1871, 140 odd years. Catherine Murty was remembered by the O'Hara family too.
Seems to be a lot of 2 or 3 families in the one grave, isn't there?
Well, I think that's
Family,
people would help each other out. That was it.
It's really expensive to open up another layer.
Absolutely. Brendan will tell you in a second about the St Mary's lair. Huge amounts of Dalbeth Cemetery. So to actually have your own lair was a big thing.
Sheer cost, it was tight then, wasn't it?
So we've got St Mary's lair here. We've also got Joseph Shaughnessy, who was a Celtic founding father. Then we'll go over to the other side of the burn. There's half a dozen Celtic players. Just for the day. So we'll do the players more on the other side. This side's been more about the founding fathers. An unmarked grave. A large stone somebody's placed there is the only thing that marks him from any other of these arches here. Joseph Shaughnessy was a lawyer. He was the first legal advisor to Celtic. In those days when Celtic were being formed, you can imagine the amount of enemies we had in the Scottish game. So the role of Joseph Shaughnessy was a major one. Not surprisingly, Joseph Shaughnessy became on the business side rather than the charitable side of the 90s, and he led the debate on a number of occasions before it became a limited liability company in 1897. Joseph Shaughnessy's son, Colonel John Shaughnessy, was on the Celtic board for 41 years after the death of his father, and he is currently the longest serving board member of the Celtic board, Colonel John Shaughnessy. Thomas White is also 41 years, but you're serving 41 years and somebody beats you by a couple of months. So the Shaughnessy link was still with Celtic. James Farrell joined the Shaughnessy law firm. The Shaughnessy law firm is still there today. James Farrell joined the Shaughnessy law firm. He then got shares and became a Celtic board member. And he was a Celtic board member up until the early 90s as well. It's a shame he lies in an unmarked grave, but again, Graves Society have got. Hopefully we'll be in touch with the family, and one time soon there'll be a marker stone here to commemorate him. So that's Joseph Shaughnessy. Half a dozen players just on the other side of the bunk.
I think as we said back there, the cost of actually not just putting up a headstone back in the day, and even now, is a considerable expense. Getting a lair meant that you were actually buying property, you were actually buying a piece of land from somebody, and of course that was outside the reach of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in Glasgow. We have no idea how many people are buried in Dalbeth. However, we could probably identify the numbers of those who are buried in marked graves. Here is a memorial who died, who were parishioners of St Mary's, Calton. There are a couple of areas of common ground in Dalbeth, and this was one of them. So there will be parishioners of lots of other parishes too. However, here is where, tens of thousands of parishioners from St Mary's were buried who couldn't afford the lair. So many people have come to us, and when you look at family histories and where my ancestor is buried, and if you look down the lair records, it says common ground. It would be impossible to find the location, because they literally were buried alongside thousands of their neighbours. So we work very closely, as you know, with St Mary's. White has been wonderful to us. We've got a very strong relationship with them, and we would hope that in the future there could be a bit more of a memorial to those from St Mary's who were so fundamentally important to the birth of Celtic. So this is a small memorial to the parishioners of St Mary's in Calton. Literally tens of thousands of Celtic supporters are buried here.
And just to mark the end of the 125th year, the Celtic Graves Society are hoping to lay here. It's just to mark the founding fathers in general, without naming anyone, from St Mary's who lie at rest in St Peter's, Dalbeth. So with more details to follow on that, we're hoping to get a nice Celtic cross that will do justice, and it'll be to all the founding fathers from St Mary's that lie in rest here.
There's a couple of rose bushes as well, aren't there? I think the rose bushes were planted for seem to be nice. Right, yeah.
We'll just go over the wee bridge over here now. I'll take you to the last part. Jeremiah Reynolds lies at rest here. We had a lovely ceremony here a couple of seasons ago, where with Danny McGrain and the Tide at the end of their wee tour over here, and they sang a couple of wee songs. It was a horrible wet day, but with the Tide Tims and Danny McGrain, as many people might know, he's quite quiet and he's no really for speaking publicly. But when we were saying about the story of Jerry Reynolds, he played for Celtic 99 times, and I think it was he never scored any goals. And that's when Danny piped up. Because Danny says, "Oh, I played for Celtic so many games." And I scored, I think he ringed off about 9 goals or 11 goals or something like that, you know. Came to life when he was talking about it. So that ceremony, although it was just a small ceremony and a rainy wet day at the end of the season, came to life for its own reasons. Jerry Reynolds was another one of those early Celtic players. Big, just like Barney Battles, exact same type of player. Defender who it said he could head the ball further than he could kick it. So he was a rough and tumble type of Celtic player. He was signed for Celtic in August. In Celtic's first full season, the 88-89 season, Celtic got to the final of the Scottish Cup, only to lose to Third Lanark. The following season, in the very first round, we played Queen's Park, then the big team. Queen's Park was the big team before amateurism came to an end, and they stayed amateurs. Everybody went professional, left them behind. So Jerry Reynolds was signed in time for the first game of the following season. August 89, Celtic played at Celtic Park 1, the original Celtic Park. Now with Celtic playing their very first season and getting to the National Cup final, I'm pretty sure that's the first time in history that's ever been achieved. I don't know if you know any different part, but I've never heard of a team in its inaugural season getting to the final of the National Cup. So Queen's Park were the big team of the day. So the first round, the very first round of the Scottish Cup, after we're losing finalists, we get Queen's Park. So Celtic go home at Queen's Park, we need to sign some big players. We signed Jerry, the stars of the day, ex-Hibs player, as many of them were. That Celtic game against Queen's Park, now if you're ever coming out of Celtic Park in Janefield Street at the Rangers end, walking towards Springfield Road, just on the north side of Janefield Street there, alongside the cemetery, that's where the original Celtic Park was. It still lies empty just now. People sell flags and scarves up in the perimeter fencing. Thousands of that's where Brother Walfred stood to watch Celtic play their first games. When Celtic moved to Celtic Park 2 in August 1892, Brother Walfred moved to London in August 1892. We don't even know if Brother Walfred ever seen a Celtic game at the current Celtic Park. So the original Celtic Park, there was 30,000. Now if you see that size of space, and in those days, 1888, when Celtic Park, the original Celtic Park was built, it was built with a small cinder track used as a cycle track and a running track for Celtic sports. There was a pavilion on the east side, which never had a roof. And a couple of years later, there was a small stand, smaller than the pavilion. It looked just the same, no roof, on the cemetery side. Now in that small area, there was 30,000 attended that game between Celtic and Queen's Park. Ended up in a draw. But Jerry Reynolds, for one of our first ever massive games, Jerry Reynolds was a big signing for that game. He was a stalwart Celtic player throughout the 1890s, played 99 games, no goals. But just like many Celtic players who were big Celtic men, after they left Celtic, he was back working at Celtic. So this is a grave of Jerry Reynolds.
Well, there's a number of very good stories about Jerry Reynolds. Brendan referred to his ability with the head. His nickname was the man with the iron head. But he was also, I think he was also, from his fellow players, he was always the butt of the joke, you know, because they considered Jerry not to be all that clever. And I think one of the stories, I think it comes from one of Pat's books, is about a time when Celtic were being quite innovative, put bales of hay out in order to make sure the pitch was playable one day. And his colleagues managed to persuade Jerry that was where the players were going to sleep the night of the game. Apparently they could pull the wool over his eyes. No. He was him and two colleagues who were walking along London Road. He went into a tobacconist's to get some baccy. He came out and both his playing colleagues had disappeared. They'd both been poached by agents, and Jerry was left standing in the street going like that. There at Celtic for a good 10 years, an absolutely brilliant servant, very popular with the support, but also, as Brendan touched on, the story of how Celtic got Jerry is one of the brilliant early stories. I think it was the night before the game, Pat, the Queen's Park game. So, picked him up from Kirfin.
Well, did he pick up the stone?
That's right, yeah. It's incredible, and we think John Glass was definitely there. John Glass.
They got a cab. A few of the committee men went in a cab to Kirfin and did that for night. Because Kirfin, of course, were keeping an eye out for any coaching, and they got wind that Celtic maybe go there after him. So they managed to get in and knock on his door and get him up out of his bed, and then they get into the cab and sped out of Kirfin. Did it in those days,
Yeah, exactly. It's just like cowboys and Indian stuff, you know. And that was the people who went out by cab to persuade him under cover of night were the men that we've already Graves have been at. John Glass, Joseph Shaughnessy.
Yeah.
Because the Maley brothers tell the story 20 years on, you know, and tell us who was all involved. And I mean, that's what they would do. They would go, these same guys that whose graves we've been at today, they would go down to England and they would chase guys like Neil and McCallum, try and persuade them to come back, induce them in all sorts of illegal ways as well. But totally committed. Reynolds, hugely popular. I think in the booklet it mentions that after a game in Paisley, the Celtic players then get the train back from Paisley. Women, particularly in the Celtic support, it's about 1894, chanting Jerry, Jerry, Jerry.
Right.
He was like a pop star of his day as well.
very much so.
A brilliant servant.
Move along now to James Moore. Now this is another early Celtic figure who we only discovered this week. We only discovered this stone just during the week. Came across the obituary of James Moore. Another early Celtic man. He was an athlete and he was into all sports, but Willie Maley had got a hold of him to help with the Celtic sports. He became the starter. He fired the starting pistol at the start of all the races. But he was heavily involved in the Celtic sports all through the 1890s. Celtic committee in 1892, 93 and 94. So we just discovered it this week, almost by accident. We were looking at obituaries. So you can see yourself, it's one of the nicest stones in Dalbeth, I think. Hopefully one day we'll meet the family and we'll maybe have a wee ceremony here and we'll get the stone restored. But this is another of the early Celtic men, but it just shows you again, there's probably a lot more of the early Celts in here, players and founding fathers. That one just found today, that's just new finds. So there's over 30 founding fathers and early Celtic players in Dalbeth. There's probably more. That's James Moore. Nice stone. Can you imagine that come up? I pity the kind of hands up and down as well. After that.
You were just saying, why Celtic around this? Why do Celtic?
Celtic up in there, Celtic is fantastic. We don't look for money, we want to be a supporter led athlete and all that. This is the grave here of Johnny Campbell. Any followers of the early Celtic days will know Johnny Campbell was one of the finest he had. Even to this day, his goal scoring record stands up. He formed a left wing combination with Sandy McMahon that was world renowned. In those days, Scottish football and even English football was really leading the rest of Europe. So the best players at Celtic, who you could almost say were amongst the best players in the world. When we signed Johnny Campbell in 1890, he scored 12 goals in a game for Celtic reserves. So when Celtic won the Scottish Cup for the first time in 1892, beating Queen's Park 5-1, Johnny Campbell scored 2 goals. He was also integral to the league championships that we won in the next 2 years as well. In 1895, he was signed by Aston Villa. In those days it was hard for Celtic to keep their players. Aston Villa came in, he scored the very first goal at Villa Park. Villa Park was newly built in those days. Johnny Campbell, if you ever come across an Aston Villa fan, he scored the very first goal there. But he was missed by Celtic. and Celtic wanted him back. So just 2 years later, he came back to Celtic. It was a £70 signing on fee, which in those days was unheard of. That was massive amounts of money. But again, he fulfilled his potential. In 5 years at Celtic, he left for 2 years, he was back for 6 years. He scored 141 goals in 264 games. Same deal, no, even a 1-2 ratio these days is good. Those days, with Celtic, and it's a name that remains throughout Celtic history. It's a lovely stone, and you can see the way it's been added to it in later years. Again, it's one that could do with a bit of a restoration. So that's Johnny Campbell, and there's a few other Celtic players from the 1890s that would have played with Johnny Campbell, and they all lie within 100 yards of each other. Just up the top here, Jimmy McMenemy, who's a Celtic legend from the 1920 days. Jimmy McMenemy. Unfortunately, the stone's lying a wee bit of disrepair here. Celtic Graves Society is actually meant to restore this. I think looking at it again today, maybe need to put it more a priority. I was actually looking for this stone the other day just to refresh my mind. Not possible you're dragging 30 people in a graveyard and they can't find a stone. So I was up looking for it, and I knew exactly where it was, having been here a few times, and I couldn't find it. Because the first thing you're doing is looking at the top, and it's got Rose McCluskey. You can just about make out Jimmy McMenemy near the bottom. For Celtic between 1902 and 1920. He won 11 championship medals in 14 years. Now, where's Pat again, the statistician, but there can't be many Celtic players got that kind of tally. The Lisbon Lions and the 9 in a row teams, 11 and 14 years. There's nothing before it. After it, I think it was 3 years before winning the league again. So it's Jimmy's toll, possibly unbeatable. 11 and 14 years between. I mean, that was the great 6 in a row team. The great went through good time, but he was the leader of the forward line at that time. When he was getting older, he joined Partick Thistle, and that was seen then as that was the end of his days. In his first season at Partick Thistle, they got to the Scottish Cup final, and they played a team called Rangers, and it was at Celtic Park, and you can still see footage just now of the teams running out the pavilion at Celtic Park, and there's Jimmy McMenemy leading the team coming out. They're in the dark colours, it wasn't the stripes in those days, I think. Rangers. So Jimmy McMenemy played in the Scottish Cup final in 1920. Rangers got beat 1-0 by Partick Thistle, so he actually won another Scottish Cup medal at the very end of his career when people thought that was him kind of in the way out. Again, just like many ex-Celts that loved the club, Jimmy McMenemy came back to work as a trainer through the 50s. He would have known great players like Jock Stein. Guys like Jimmy McMenemy is another kind of person who gave his life to Celtic. We'd know all the players for the early days. From 1902 to 1920, kept in touch with the club and then worked with the club throughout the 50s. He knew the next level of player in the 50s, Jock Stein. In 1962, he was a guest at the Celtic Supporters Association rally. He was a star guest, and he reassured everybody on the platform that Celtic will be back. He got to see the 1965 Scottish Cup final when Celtic beat Dunfermline, and that was really to herald the days of Celtic. A trophy since 1958. The year after, we beat Rangers 7-1. We beat Partick Thistle in the League Cup final. Never won a trophy for 7 years. So many people would probably say the same. 65 Scottish Cup final was the start. If Celtic had lost that Scottish Cup final with Dunfermline, we were a big team. We may know things wouldn't have moved just as swiftly as they did. So that's when it all came together. Jimmy McMenemy was there to see that, but he died shortly after it. Now, it's just a pity. Can you imagine Jimmy McMenemy at Lisbon? Celtic family at Celtic supporters rally. We'll be back to the top. Would that not just be the final setting for Jimmy McMenemy?
How's that for a prophecy?
Unfortunately, what a prophecy, aye. I mean, in 1962, Celtic between 1926 and between 1925 and 65, Celtic won the league trophy 4 times. Can you imagine those days? If you were born in 1965 and Stein arrived, you'd be saying to yourself, won league 4 times in my lifetime. Who's this job? So unfortunately Jimmy wasn't there to see it, but Jimmy played a massive part again in the early history of Celtic.
When did you die in the weather? Oh, June, just after the cup final.
Aye, that's right, just after the cup final.
Yeah, June.
23rd of, aye, it was 80s. Aye. When you talk of Celtic legends, you know, you talk of Lisbon Lions and Henrik Larsson, there's people like this here lying, you know, less than a mile from Celtic Park. People don't know much about them, don't know where they lie at rest. People would come along, help tend to the graves, or even lay a flower.
They don't, everybody's too busy nowadays.
Aye. The next one here, before we go over to that side, we'll get 3 or 4, is Johnny McAlinden. Johnny McAlinden here, between 1948 and 57. No a great era for Celtic, but he would have been a friend of Johnny Bonner.
He was indeed, very much so.
Yeah,
I love the man, John. From Penrith.
that's right. Yep.
He'd a sister that was a nun, and he always used to tell me a story. His sister told John this story, that when you're in Newmarket, she was a nun in Newmarket, which is very horsey country, equestrian, and if a horse and a car are going through, and a car comes and hits the horse and the car at the one time, and the lady or the falls at the horse is out the car and she's badly injured, the ambulance comes or the vet comes and attends to the horse first before you attend to the human being. I always remember John McAlinden told me that story all the time. If there's an accident, then the horse is attended to first before the human being. It's an old bylaw. I don't know if it's like that. Every time I see John McAlinden, I think of that story. You're weird, isn't it? Mental, isn't it?
Came to his end.
No, it was worse than that.
Oh dear. Okay. Johnny Mac, as he was known, after his playing days, he was another ex-Celt who would come back to work at the club, and he worked as a maintenance electrician. Celtic at the new floodlights in. Johnny McAlinden it was who was responsible for the 4 new magnificent floodlights. The other story about Johnny McAlinden, you'll probably know yourself, but any of the footage you'll see of Celtic coming back from Lisbon, and you've got the Celtic players in the back of a truck with green and white bunting around it with the European Cup. You know, can you imagine the present day players who jump up in the back of that truck and take around Celtic back?
See, that was some practical reasons for that, because the Narrowson track, the only vehicle would have done it would have been a lorry. Couldn't get a bus around that would be right. Now, the reason why they used that, and it was not a coal lorry, a lot of people said it was not a coal lorry, it was a builder's lorry. A road. And what they did was they were doing maintenance work at Celtic Park and at the Celtic end, and round the track basically. So Celtic just used the track. They just used that lorry, and they just cleared out all the dust and all that, tidied it all up. And John McAlinden was the driver. He was the one that drove the truck. That was typical of Celtic because I mean Celtic were a very homely club, very unpretentious club. They would never have thought nobody would have thought, well, let's hire a. Of course, you couldn't at that time. They couldn't at that time. You know, they do go to city chambers and noses in a divided city like Glasgow. You couldn't hold a ceremony in George Square and all that. So the only way, and you couldn't have a bus tour of the city either. The only way you could hold it was at Celtic Park. So it was immensely practical.
Yep.
So it's not right. People would say dismiss it as a coal or that crap, you know. It was just typical Celtic.
Did John drive the truck round with the cup when he came back? As soon as he walked into the pavilion, I know what John drove. This is a true story. John McAlinden told me that Johnny Doyle had come up. He done never let it down. He came to him and asked him if he'd any wire to rewire the house, and John said, I genuinely had run out of wire of flex just a couple of days before. Johnny, I've not got any. You have to go somewhere else. I've not got any. He said, and how do you think I would have felt if I'd supplied Johnny Doyle with that? It was like a blessing in disguise. I didn't have any. Do you know what I mean? He was awful fond of Johnny too, as everybody was. Do you know what I mean? I got fond of him as Johnny. My dad used to stick him up Johnny drunk Jameson's Irish whiskey and doubles. They never took a single, it was always a double. and then he used to go down the skip, Pomedy skip. I don't know if the Pomedy Refuge Centre was there at the time. They used to go always, we'd always clean these gardens, a big house in Hollywood Drive in Kings Park, the Hollywood you call it, Broadwood, and he's always in his garden. He's a big guy, he loved his garden, and he was always picking up rubbish and taking it up to the dump. And that, but he always nicked in and get a couple of halves off my dad. You know what I mean? You know, so, the great days.
I mean, the company stewards that Pat's saying about, they would be advertising in the Celtic handbooks around the 50s and stuff like that. So you see what the connection is.
The connection was, well,
it's exactly what Pat's saying.
it's just practical. They were doing maintenance work, and as I said, people say, oh well, why didn't he do this? The only way they could get around that track at Celtic Park was in a lorry. It's the only way you could do it. You couldn't drive a bus on it. Too narrow.
There's a few great pictures as well, see those little black and white ones, and you see look like
That's right,
and then somebody's put the colour away and just add in the tricolours.
A light broke one day before a big game, big midweek game, and dark, the heights. I hate heights, I've got a great lifelong hatred of heights. So did my daddy, hated heights. And John went up there. Big joke to me, my lights are out, John, my lights are out, no problem. Big John in the dark, it was 7:30 in the winter time. I was climbing up, but one day he did say it was really. Now, you got to remember, John was married with 4 daughters. I mean, see now, you wouldn't get I don't know what they do now, so I don't know, how do they fix these big lights, these
A gang of people would do it. A gang of people would do it.
It's a contractor
You see a few people working at it.
John just up the ladder,
Oh, aye.
bit dark, what call what
So we've got 3 more ex-players just along here.
Listen everybody, Brendan, thank you very much. I'm going to leave, I'm going to go up and get my mother. She's on her own, right? Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you everybody for the love, the tribute to my dad from all the family. Pat, good to see you. Thanks.
This was Sandy McMahon. Lies at the ceremony, and we put down a marker stone. Since the family then have come along and they've put down their own, paid their own respects as well. See the wee ceremony here. This was unmarked just up until the last couple of years. Sandy played from 1891 to 1903. Again, he had a better goal scoring record than Larson. If you look back, 217 appearances, 171 goals. I mean, that's phenomenal. That's like 2 goals in every 3 games. As a striker for Celtic, he had a fantastic partnership with Johnny Campbell. Sandy's style was big, awkward and ungainly player at 6 foot, but he had pace, grace and elegance. So even though he was one of the greatest Celtic players of the time, he was still slagged off for his appearance. You know, they were getting for something. So he centre forward or inside left alongside Johnny Campbell. Better goal scoring record than Henrik Larsson. Capped a measly 6 times for Scotland. His nickname was the Duke, the Prince of Dribblers. At the early age of 46. Again, a lot of players in those days, after their playing days, they moved away and not a lot was heard about them. From talking to the family, I'm not quite sure what the story was. It's a wee bit of a tragic story to it, but the family, got a nice stone there in Celtic Graves, paid their respects. And again, anybody that's in the area, Sandy McMahon, one of the greatest early Celts, with the best goal scoring record throughout the 1990s, without a shadow of doubt. Now he lies at rest just alongside David Hamilton, who's just under the tree there. And the last one then is Dan Doyle, who's just down at the front there. And that was the first ever Celtic Graves ceremony. So we'll just go to those two.
Sandy's was the first double ceremony. We had the ceremony, we put the marker down, and then the family said we wanted to put another stone down. The family one. Aye, we only doubled.
That photograph there has been lying since 2 years, 3 years it is probably now, since we had the ceremony for David Hamilton. David Hamilton was one of the Celtic greats, signed for Celtic in 1902. The famous forward line, Bennett, McMenemy, Wynne, Summers and Hamilton. Forward line.
5-man forward line.
That's it, innit? How did it work then, Pat? What was it basically, what, a 3-2-5 or what?
2-3-5 years.
2-3-5.
That's what I'm doing on Wednesday.
Two full-backs, 3 half-backs and 5 forwards. 2 wingers. 2 wingers, yeah, that's it. 2 wingers. That was important, you had 2 wingers, because that was the orthodox tactic, was to get that ball to the byline, get it across. That was it.
David Hamilton was one of the wingers in that great team as well, with the 5 forwards. He was suspended in October 1907, rather harshly, I think, when all he done was say to the referee, "I wish I had a revolver." So he was suspended. I think he was suspended quite heavily, something like 2 months, Pat, was it not?
Something like that.
Never won any caps for Scotland whatsoever. But this was at Graves Society, and it was a fantastic turnout by the family, and it's great to see a marker again. And I remember there was a wee kind of red bit of cloth there. That was a Poland scarf somebody had brought along.
Celtic Poland.
Aye.
Polish boys.
Aye, that's right, aye.
Is that it on the cover there?
Aye, that's the one. Aye. So
when, Davy's great grandson, Sean Hamilton, had been in touch with us in the early days, basically saying, great grandad played for Celtic, but we don't know. So we were able to do so, and that's why, in the early days we thought, because of that family involvement, we thought it was really important to mark where Davy was at rest. So fantastic ceremony, and that was the misty day, wasn't it? Sort of St Celtic's supporters sort of walking through the mist, and Sean was interviewed by Celtic Underground. Celtic Underground put Chris recorded the ceremony, and Eddie Pearson for the Celtic Underground website interviewed Sean, and Sean described, he's a good Springburn boy, it was obviously great. Sean described going back up to his seat, and his whole bus came that day, and when he went to take his seat at Celtic Park, the whole area stood up and gave him a standing ovation, which was fantastic to see it come from, "Can you help me to find my great grandad where he's buried?" to applause was just fantastic. And he was as Brendan says, some player, 6 in a row team, brilliant player.
Just to avoid any confusion, the fact that he never was capped for Scotland has nothing to do with the fact he scored 8 goals against Rangers in his career.
So Dan Doyle just. I don't know why 2 benches lying there, David. Is that you made a donation? Dan Doyle was the original Celtic Graves Society ceremony. Peter Lawwell standing here. That was on the 6th of November, 3 years ago. The 125th, or 122nd as it was then, the date of the first ever meeting. Dan was another ex-Hibs player who played for Hibs against Cowlairs in the very first game at Celtic Park 1. Dan then moved on and played for Everton. In those days Everton were a massive club, still are a massive club. But Celtic came calling. He was obviously a local boy. So nobody could understand in those days, how could an amateur club like Celtic in 1890 even go asking for a player of a stature? And as usual, just with the pushy nature of the Celtic committee in those days, the business skills, we got him. Now how did we get him? How much did we pay him? We never paid him anything, we gave him a pub in Blantyre. That's what it was in those days. You were offered a pub.
That's tremendous, isn't it?
And then whenever there was obviously questions asked, the answer was that a Celtic friendly supporter had donated. Nobody could find out for definite there was any name on the ownership of the pub, simply Dan Doyle, and that was the transaction.
Any rumours McAvenny had this written in his contract?
So he was earning his living just like James Kelly. When James Kelly came to Celtic as well, you got a pub. That's how it worked these days. Dan Doyle was another of the robust defenders in his day, left back for Celtic. Before he joined Celtic, he was involved in an incident where a player actually died. Dan Doyle. It was just, in those days it was rough and tumble, the ball came down, it was a high ball, he went to kick it, other person went to chest it, contact with the guy's spleen, the guy died in the dressing room the next day, they never even moved him out of the dressing room. There was never any blame to Dan Doyle. Dan Doyle was one of these men who knew his worth, and he would ask for his wages a year in advance, and half the time he wouldn't turn up for training either. He was a kind of a law unto himself, but at the same time, he gave Celtic the 1890s. He was up to 1898. He eventually died in 1918 when cancer got him. But the original Neil Lennon is possibly a way of describing Dan Doyle and his robust, his love for the club, and he would do anything for the club. He was a controversial character, but he was a hero in the Celtic 1890s. And the first real big name who left a club like Everton to come to an amateur club was Celtic. But Dan was the Celtic Graves Society. It was one of the first graves we found, and it was the first grave we marked. So that's Dan Doyle.
If anybody hasn't come across it before, there's a fantastic book that came out about Dan about 5 years ago by one of the women who work at the park as one of the museum guides, tour guides. What's her name again? Mary Rowan. And Mary was here that day as well, Peter Lawwell, at our first ceremony. The book is an incredible read. The research that she's done quite unbelievable, and it reads well. Mary's also had a couple of other cowboy books, I think, published, and she's a very good writer. But the amount of things that you'll find out about the early days of Celtic in her book is just incredible, and that of course helped inspire us. I think Mary had found out that the grave was roughly in this area, and that was always one of the reasons that prompted us to have our first ceremony for this guy. Quite a character.
So that concludes the event. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you guys for all the work.
Thanks especially to Pat and Johnny Bonner's son. What is Johnny Bonner's son called? Johnny as well. For adding, fantastic stories as well. That's what it's all about. Well, hopefully, if you guys can even, pass on some stories to your friends, your family, and make them aware as well. Spread the word about the Celtic men that lie at rest here. Just less than a mile for Celtic fan.
In a couple of weeks, we'll be having our next big ceremony, which I think most of you will be interested in. Will Dave and Cathcart, which again through individual supporters and then the club as well. It was properly refurbished and done up about 3 years ago, and hopefully we're going to get it reclaimed again. Unfortunately, as you'll see with some of the graves, if they're located under trees, they tend to get dirty quite quickly, but finally, thanks to the help of the family, we're going to have a ceremony which we've not been able to do. Willie Maley's grave particularly was one we were always concerned about security wise, because it's an open graveyard, there's no fresh burial, so loads of kids in there at night time, included part of the cemetery. The family are now comfortable with us having a ceremony, so hopefully that will be in 3 weeks time, I think, Brendan?
Yeah. Found the father's one in here, hopefully people can make it as well. But Jamie, just remind us there's drinks available in the CSA club. If anybody's interested, they're more than welcome.
We were going well before that anyway.
It's a birthday bonus. Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks very much.
So there you are, that's us for another podcast. Again, I can only apologise for the sound issues. I hope they didn't take away from the enjoyment of what are some fantastic stories of our club's history. So my thanks to Jim, Brendan, Paul, Jamie and all the rest of the Celtic Graves Society guys for the tour, as well as a special guest Pat and John for their insights. I've got to say, this was one of the best Sunday afternoons I've spent in a long time. We were in the cemetery well over 3 hours, and on what was a beautiful sunny day I could have listened to the stories for another 3 hours easily. If you know your history indeed. And speaking of that, if you've enjoyed this, then you're bound to be getting the Celtic History podcast as well. Remember, we're still looking for donations for the 10 charities, so please consider it. Anything at all is always welcome. Full details are on HaleHaleMedia.com. and one of those 10 charities is of course the Celtic Graves Society themselves, and hopefully I'll have sorted out the recording issues in time for their next event. Anyway, enough for one podcast, back to the football action next time. This has been the Paradise Support, talk to you all again soon.
Church down the Calvin Way. Brother Walford's plan was set in 1888. The club was born to feed the poor, and Celtic was his name, and that was Brother Walford's dream. God had given him the strength to fight for good and rights, and he has given us the team, the blazing green and whites, from Irish shores to Scottish hearts and all that's in between. That was Brother Walford's dream. We see no colour, we see no race nor creed, we stand together, that was Brother Walford's dream. I know he's looking down on us and smiles at what he sees, in this place called Paradise, united in belief. Through the wind and through the rain and throughout history, we won't forget